let me figure out how I want to do this. We just, Brian just ducked his head in to put us out live on YouTube because for some reason it dropped off. So we're appropriately accessible for our public right now. What I'll do, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully get to the one that has our audit report on it. Where I'm going to focus, and you can redirect me, but where I want to focus is on the bond audit report, because that's the agreed upon procedures and the performance audit. Really, hi Gary. Gary's joined the meeting. Glad you could make it.
Hi Gary, this is John. We just started on the audit report, okay?
Your timing is perfect. So I thought I'd go through just really quickly, because really what this report does is double check the work that we've been doing as a committee, where I've been sharing the detailed reports and offering information about the project so that the committee can conclude with transparency to the public that the expenditures are appropriate given the ballot measure that was approved by the voters. So scrolling down to page 5, on my screen as opposed to page 5 in the report, here's the opinion on the financial statements from our auditors. That the financial statements referred to above present fairly, which is as close to correct as the auditors will come based on their work. They aren't going to say they're perfect. They aren't going to say they're correct. They'll say they present fairly. In all material respects, the financial position of the building fund / Measure T. So that's the work the auditors do on the financial report, which starts on page 6. What I'll point out to you here is that our deposits with the treasurer plus the amount of interest income they still owed us on June 30th equals the amount of money that we still owe in bond funds. And that's why there's no fund balance. And that's why we're talking about this being our last meeting, because as of June 30th, 2020, there were no more bond funds to spend on projects. So after that, you're released from your responsibility, right? But the responsibility being to make sure the funds are spent efficiently and on the projects that were approved by the voters. Also down here, you can see the proceeds for the year from interest income at $235,000. The expenditures being $26.5 million, which between the two of those numbers fully expend those revenues and our fund balance. So we have 0 fund balance left. There's 2 more things I'll show on this report that are important. On the 14th page, we're entering the report on internal controls for financial reporting. This is kind of a report where they're testing our procedures in the school district, kind of the gears and the mechanics as opposed to the numbers. And the report talks about how they do their work and what their objectives are. And here what they say is, during our audit, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that we would consider material weaknesses. And the material weakness is something inside your procedures that would allow a material error or a material misstatement to go through your process and end up undiscovered in your financial statements. So that's the extent that they work on our procedures, is to make sure they're sufficient to prevent. And by material, what they mean is, if that information is in the financial statement, an informed user's opinion would change about the financial statements. Usually it's a big number, like if you had $100,000 in cash and it should have been $20,000 in cash, you would feel differently about how much cash that entity had, as opposed to they had $102,000, it should have been 105. You still feel the same way. They have the cash they need. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what they're talking
Yeah.
about. Talk about material. The real important stuff for our work here on the committee is on page 18. Is right here. The independent auditors report on performance. So this is what is really specific to just Proposition 39 bond spending, where they have the independent auditor dig into the actual expenditures. And in their results, it says the result of our tests indicated the district expended building funds only for the specific projects approved by the voters. And that's really a big piece of our work, the biggest piece. And down on page 22 is where they talk about how they came to that conclusion. I wanted to make sure and point that out for you. Here on the third bullet, they tested $11.9 million worth of expenditures, 44.7% of the total expenditures for the year. And those were the expenditures that allowed them to come to the conclusion that all of those expenditures they tested were on projects that were approved by the voters. So that's how they do this work for performance audits. They grab a sample size sufficient enough to see the methodology. They say, we'll select expenditures to get to 40%. And just based on rounding, they got to 44.7%. So they looked at almost half of our expenditures for the year, and they were all directly related to the projects approved by the voters. And that's how they came to that.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Beecher?
Of course you may.
You said June the 20th of June, whatever, that we had no money left. So that account's been closed then, or whatever you used where the money was supposed to be? There's nothing in there at all, no, not a penny or nothing, correct?
There's no money in that fund at all. We'll need board action to actually close that fund.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't leave a penny sitting there for somebody to look at.
Nope. That's why one of the things we did is we did our best to estimate, because the treasurer hadn't made it available when we were closing our books. We were estimating what our interest accrual would be and then fully expending that interest accrual as well, even though the cash wasn't in our hands yet.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the questions that Ms. Belton did ask about these audit reports in our last meeting was just to make sure that when we got, or maybe it was Mr. Michael, when we got to this point, if there was anything in the audit reports that we received that caught my eye or seemed out of line with the draft that we reviewed earlier in the year. And these are all in alignment with our expectations for these reports. No surprises in here. It's essentially the rest of the story that they couldn't get into the draft in time for our meeting in December.
So in other words, if Mr. Smith ever does run again and get elected, he won't be able to find anything nasty to talk about, correct? I think that's what Nancy was looking at.
That's a two-part question. He won't be able to find anything that won't stop him from talking nasty.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to bring that
up. Sounds like
up.
political consultation there.
But look, we welcome the input and the feedback from the community for sure, including Mr. Smith's, because they're looking and they're keeping us honest, and they're asking questions that people have. Mr. Smith always asked questions that other people had. He was just very persistent in finding more questions after the answers were provided. So we would welcome his questions if he had them related to the bond funds as well.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
I just wanted to ask, just in the spirit of reducing costs, you know, I think in the minutes we talked about, this is a $45 million project. And between the land and the construction, it's about 35% over budget,
Mhm.
so, which I think is significant. I wanted to know if, you know, where in the process did that occur? Was that toward the end of the event? Somewhere before that? Had you been given any alert from the architect firm or construction? And where are those costs? Why such a miss, basically?
Mhm.
And where did it occur?
Sure. I guess the start of my answer would be that it occurred in every aspect of the construction and of the planning. I think that the design costs weren't as dramatically over budget, but just the design costs came in over budget. The land purchase was 40 to 50% more than we had planned for. We had built our estimate based on what we had paid for the property at Jimenez School, and that isn't the way that our acquisition went for this property. When we entered into negotiations, the property was zoned for commercial and residential, and so it was a whole different approach right from the beginning. When we purchased Jimenez, it was zoned public facilities, which has a whole different value, right, than commercial / residential. So that right out of the gate was a big hit. Then the estimates that we used for the project costs were also based on the estimates for Jimenez. And when we built Jimenez, there were no bond funds available from the state. And so the demands on the time of contractors and the materials for schools were much lower. So the market price for those services and those supplies was a lot lower. And so one of the folks that I called, one of the things I did when we started talking about the cost estimates during the design phase was I called several of my contacts in other districts and other architects to say, hey, this is where they're benching our cost per foot. Is that reasonable? And the folks I talked to said, that may be high, but that's about what school construction is going for. And one of them commented that we purchased the last school on sale when we built Jimenez, that it was the last of the inexpensive schools, and that, you know, between the additional design costs required by the California Construction Code improvements that every year or not every year, but every so often they revise those codes, they always get more expensive, right? Because they always think of new ways to improve construction. None of them get cheaper, right? So the buildings get stronger, they get safer, they get healthier, they get more efficient. All of that costs during construction. And so that was a big part of it. But I did make sure right from the beginning when we started talking about the construction cost is going to be 39 million, 45 million, 47 million, 48 million, we immediately started reaching out for independent sources that weren't on the design team, right? But even during the design process, our architects, DLR group, were submitting the plans as they were being developed to costing agencies, that their work is, show me your drawings, I'll build out your materials list and your labor list and your time list to say, here's what we think it's going to cost. So we'd have good estimates right from the beginning. And then as part of the process, we compared different design alternatives to say, if we do this design, the price tag could be, if we do this design, the price tag could be. And so we looked at the 2-story option versus what they call a finger design, which is just a bunch of single-story buildings in a row. While the construction cost was less expensive by like 3 million for the finger design, we felt that our issue with over budget, the question you're bringing up, Mr. Michaels, wasn't a $3 million issue. It was like a $15 issue, $15 million issue. And so we decided at that point was to spend a little more money to preserve that open space for the field that's out there, right? The play field and the play equipment, because a lot of that would be building layout if we didn't make that choice. But we did, what we also did, Scott Roy and myself, is we went through those finishes and started trying to strip out some of the finer finishes that wouldn't add as much aesthetic value as we thought the price tag that they added did. And we pulled out probably 2 or 3 or 4 million from that process, just trying to keep the design practical as much as we can.
Can I just ask to follow up on that? So, and if you were to do it again, I guess then what you wouldn't do is use the Jimenez model, basically. You wouldn't use the Jimenez precedent when you were looking at the budget for this project. Would that be correct?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, the thing that I wanted to be sure of is that the cost of the construction was the right cost, that we weren't being taken advantage of, that the design wasn't overbuilt, that those weren't issues, that we could choose to bring back those items and save 10 or 12 million bucks and get it more in line. That was where we made that choice. And so if that was going to be the real construction cost, then let's move forward, right? Next time, I think to that end, Gary, what I want to do is I want to reach out to those folks that I benchmarked my costs with and ask them in the front end, what are you paying for school sites? And get that per square foot construction cost on the front end so I have a better idea going in.
But I have a question for you, Mr. Beecher. How many portables can you put on that school to get it expanded since you went to the 2-story?
So I'm not sure what your question is. Now that it's constructed, how many can I put on there?
Now that the school is built and we have an influx of kids like you've been having, and you had to put portables, how many portables can you put on that school site?
Well, today the answer to that question is 0, because I don't want to put any portables on that school site. I'm trying to avoid putting portables on our brand new campuses. But one of the things we considered was putting utilities out close to the basketball courts, because that's a nice flat space that you could set portables on, probably 4 or 6.
Okay.
But I'm going to try really hard to avoid that.
All right. I was just curious. Thank you.
So Matt, I have a question.
Sure.
Usually, on a project this big, there's a punch list of maybe some items that the contractors have to come back and fix. How are we looking here? Are we 100%, or are there a few items that need to be looked at?
Sure. So there is a punch list, and we are still working through it. I think at this point, all of the materials are on site. It took us a while to get the metal panels for the upper floor along the walkway. The steel panels that go up there took a long time to get on site, so we had construction netting up there to keep it safe for a long time. The other thing I know that is still potentially out there, last I heard, was resolving the pendant lighting and how it hangs in the library on the 2nd floor. So there's still some construction that has to be done in there. After that, I think it's pretty minor punch list stuff, but I haven't really. You're not holding
any reserve back, correct? Or are you still holding that 5%?
We have the 5% retention, and we're
still have the 5%
completion. Yeah, we're going to wait for completion on that. We're going to wait for the notice of completion. We're going to file that notice of completion, and we're going to wait 20 days to make sure that there aren't stop notices out there or liens that subcontractors may want to file, because we want to make that final payment as clean as possible. There's still a few potential change orders out there as well that we're working through, where we're trying to define responsibility, and we're trying to define what the right cost for those change orders are. And so that piece is out there too. The other thing I wanted to talk about real quick gets back to Mr. Michael's question related to the budget. The other strange calculus that's a part of that is you're sizing a school bond, not just for the projects, but you're sizing the school bond for the appetite of the community. And so we thought we had more of an appetite than 45 million. We might have dreamt up more of a budget for that school site or other projects, but we felt like our sweet spot at the time for that election was going to be about 45 million. So that was another thing that kind of squeezed on our ability to budget that school site where it ended up. Are there
Do
other
we have any more? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was asking the same question you were asking, John.
Hey, I have a question. Was that on Veris that asked you that question prior to mine? Or who asked that
No,
question?
Luke's not in the room. Luke had another meeting come up, and so he couldn't make it today. So we've got Dave
Okay.
Cross, Gary Michaels, and yourself.
Okay, I was just curious. All right, thank you.
And it was
right.
Mr. Cross who followed up with that question.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, let's move on to the next item. What is it, Jessica?
Other business? Oh.
That's right.
Oh, you can hear me. I wasn't sure if my mic was on or off.
Oh, wow. I can hear audio now. Thank you.
Okay. Other business.
Other business. We don't have any other business, do we, guys?
No.
Nope.
No. Well, I just want to personally say thank you to everybody that participated in this project over the, what has it been, 5 years or 6 years, Mr. Beecher?
I think it's been 5 years. I think that's right.
God, it's been,
Wow.
and it, we finally get paroled, guys. We get paroled.
Well, I want to thank everybody on the staff, Matt, and everybody else, and that's been involved with this. It's been quite a bit of time, but very worthwhile, and I appreciate being on this committee.
Yeah, I'd like to just say again, I haven't been on as long as you have, really, just a year or something. But for me, it's been a great experience to really see the work involved for Luke, and especially for Matt and the rest of his staff. And this is not day-to-day operational items. This is a huge, massive project. And what I see, I guess, as a citizen, is that that really, I kind of wonder if other school boards have addressed this in other ways. I mean, I just, here's Matt against a construction firm that's making millions of dollars of profit, and he's a salaried employee doing this. And I'm wondering if some school boards, because I know that's not the purview of this committee, would somehow produce an incentivized program for someone like Matt and his staff to engage with this project that might actually incentivize more efficiency in these projects if there was compensation for it. I'm just thinking aloud here. But the net is salaried employee dealing with a group of people at the architecture and the construction firm. That's a lot of work, and this has been going on for years. And this is above and beyond day-to-day operation. So I'm exhausted, and I'm just a citizen looking on. Thank you for all your work.
It's my pleasure.
Well, thank you, Mr. Beecher, Jessica, and also wanted to thank Kristen in the beginning for all the work she did on this project before Jessica came on. And with that, any other things? I'll adjourn the meeting.
I'll just say real quick, I want to thank all of you as well, and Nancy Felton, for your attendance and your participation and your engagement in this process. It is so much better to have an active Citizens Bond Oversight Committee where you can really work through these things and get the word out, because it's not always the case. There are Citizens Bond Oversight Committees that they just advertise and recruit for all the time, and people don't come. So I appreciate that you all came. You came with the attitude of inquiry and curiosity, but at the same time, you were very fair and just to me and my team and the work we do. And that's not always the case either. So I just appreciate your approach. And our work isn't done as a school district. And I hope your work isn't done as a person interested in serving the community. I may keep your contact information and reach out to you at some point. I don't know when that would be and for what, but I just really appreciate all that you have done. And to know that we've got folks who are informed and invested in our work is gratifying and comforting. So I thank you for all of that as well. And our work goes on, except for those of us who've moved to Florida who may really actually retire from school.
Yeah,
school
I
government.
have a question. Do you really think that Beecher's gonna let my butt go? I don't think so. So I've moved 3 times since I've been on this thing. There's no way Beecher's letting me out of it. If he does, I'll be disappointed. But anyway, I'm gonna call the meeting adjourned. You guys have a great evening. Go to your next meeting, Mr. Beecher, all right?
All right. Thank you,
Again,
Don.
All right, thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
Mr. Mike.
Thank you. Nice working with all you guys.
Appreciate you all.
Good night, thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Stay safe. Thank you, Jessica.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Okay, have a wonderful